Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Brussels Summit. My name is Rebecca Meads. I'm a security consultant in professional services. I will be joined on stage later today by Louis Shah, who is a security solutions architect at AWS, and Joris Hermans from NXP. He is a director of enterprise architecture. So today, we're going to take you through a practical guide to incident response in AWS. So Joris will be kicking us off with a walkthrough of how NXP have solved this problem. And it's also a kind of a view for you to see where you can take your incident response in AWS. Then Louis is going to take it right back to basics and talk about, well, what is incident response in AWS? Some of you might just be starting out with incident response. You might be doing it manually right now and kind of in a bit of an ad hoc way, but you want to move towards a more automated incident response strategy. So we're going to talk you through how you can begin to do that and how you can start to evolve that incident response solution. We have a tool called Incident Manager. It is a capability as part of the Systems Manager suite of tools, if you're familiar with that. We're going to talk you through that. How does it help you with moving your incident response processes? I'm going to give a bit of a demo, so talk you through how do you set that tool up, what capabilities are in that tool, how do you use it, and then I will talk a little bit about how you can bring that in and generate a feedback loop. Okay, I will invite Joris to the stage, who's going to tell us how NXP have done things.
Thanks. So, good morning, everyone. What I would first like to start out with is a very simple request to see if you're all awake, or maybe you enjoyed a little bit too many good Belgian beers last night, which I could definitely recommend. So just like to ask to raise your hand if the following applies to you. If you have a car, or a smartphone, or a smartwatch. Just raise your hand. Okay. Of course, silly question. Quite obvious answer. That probably applies to most of you, if not all. And just wanted to illustrate that that means that probably all of you are also using one or multiple NXP chips in your daily life. So NXP is a global semiconductor company that creates solutions that enable secure connections. So that could be the chip in your car key to open up your car in a keyless fashion. Could be your mobile phone to execute the mobile payment with the payment device. That's also an NXP chip. Or the same with your smartwatch. These are all things that NXP produces, builds, and sells. And if you hear this, you might think, hey, this is a probably American Silicon Valley-based company, but quite the opposite. We're based in Eindhoven, so it's around 100 kilometers away. And the reason for that is quite simple. We have a long history. We actually came from Philips. It started out as Philips Semiconductors. And then in 2007, Philips decided to sell it off, and that became NXP today. Maybe also a small thing, we also have a branch here in Leuven close by. They're doing a lot of cryptography work, close working together with IMEC and the University of Leuven. So, I would like to take you pretty fast through our public cloud journey. There are a lot of things I can talk about here, why we choose a restricted multi-cloud. You also see Azure, you see AWS. I'm not going to focus on that. Our time is unfortunately limited. But some three key takeaways from a security perspective. And the first, you can see, okay, if you're starting out on your journey in public cloud or on cloud, what are the things from a security perspective you really need to take on board? And the first one stated here is start as Cloud Center of Excellence. Gartner states that, different consultancies state that. I think that's a given. But a key thing from a security aspect is that you really embed a security person in your CCOE. And that security person needs to have cloud-native security capabilities. The reason being pretty simple. Security in cloud is somewhat different than your conventional security with a lot of InfoSec people are used to when you still are leveraging on-premise data centers. The second one is cloud policy. So really from the start, set your baseline from roles and responsibilities. It could be if you're in AWS and someone spins up this huge Oracle DB, which is crunching cores, and at the end of the month they get a 50K bill. You do want to have your financial accountability set. And the same applies also from a security perspective. If there's a security incident somewhere in a workload which you're hosting in AWS, make sure that you set that accountability and the roles and responsibilities straight from the start. It doesn't have to be like a 50-page document with tons of races. Just clearly delineate the fundamentals there, and I think you have a good start. The last thing here from the slide, you can see we build a landing platform. I think also probably most companies are doing that. You can use different tools, AWS Control Tower. You can use, within NXP, we chose ADF, so the AWS Deployment Framework. What you need to do there is really embed the security already in your landing platform. Just to illustrate, we have solution designs for both AWS and Azure, and I think probably 1/3 of that document is dedicated to onboarding the proper security mechanisms and the security controls. Looking on 2022, we have a focus on zero trust. So a lot of buzz and hype around that, and Louis, who will present shortly, has a chalk talk on that, so definitely check that out. I'll also be there and joining the conversation. Maybe just a fun fact to illustrate, which will say why the AWS people are smiling when they see NXP. We have our chip design in AWS, and I think around 2024 we'll be burning around, let's say, 95 to 100,000 cores on AWS. So you can imagine why these people are quite happy with NXP. Putting back to that policy, governance, I think, is essential. And 3 key takeaways there is take a holistic approach on security posture. Those are expensive words, but what do I mean with that is that you take an integrated approach. The same as if you go to the doctor. If you only focus on, hey, you need to quit smoking, okay, that will help out. But essentially, you need to look at the total well-being of your person, and that's the same with security. Don't only think about vulnerability scanning and fixing vulnerabilities. Also take, for instance, misconfigurations into account for the full security. Think about how you grant access, and if you maybe are not granting too many people access to your restricted administrative groups. So all of these things make the total security posture of your workload and put that in as a baseline. Second one is cloud consumers. Within NXP, we have a clear definition of that. That means anyone making use in NXP of our AWS landing platform is entitled and is called a cloud consumer. And we push the accountability down to those cloud consumers for mostly everything, finance, operations, but also the security aspects. How does that roll if someone wants to get an AWS account? They go through ServiceNow, so that's our ITSM portal, and they need to put in who is the business owner and the resource owner. And the accountability is set to those persons, and we explicitly ask them that they acknowledge what their accountability will be. Seems quite obvious that you push the accountability, but from the on-premise context where we came from in NXP, that was quite a difference. We had on-premise data centers, security was done by SecOps and cyber. We had our operations being managed by a service provider. So for a lot of these application owners, the concept of taking full accountability was quite strange. The third one, if you push the accountability to those teams, I think as IT or a Cloud Center of Excellence, you have a responsibility to make sure that these people also have the tools and the capabilities to take their accountability. That's easy to push the accountability, but if they don't have any tools, that will also not be successful. So focus on the support and the education part. I put in a small example here. We have different trainings through our training portal, and if you want to onboard into cloud, you can follow this training. This highlights the essential governance. You can see one highlighted part, Secure-it, which then describes what you need to do, what you need to think of when you really want to move into AWS. So this is why we're here. High level, this is our incident response architecture, and you see in a centerpiece that's Security Hub. So with regard to that security posture, we centralized all of that into Security Hub. If a cloud consumer has a workload or multiple workloads and they need to take ownership of their security, we say, look into Security Hub, fix the things over there. So how do we feed Security Hub? Get the insights yourself. So we have different tools, native tools, connected into Security Hub, GuardDuty for detective controls, AWS Config for preventative controls, CloudTrail for all kinds of monitoring, and then also Rapid7. So it's not that we only use cloud native tools, we also have Rapid7, that's our vulnerability management tool, that pre-integrates into Security Hub. If you follow then the downstream path, we have different integrations through Kinesis, Lambda, that then are connected into our downstream applications. Our SIEM, so our security incident event management tool, is Splunk. And also, so any kind of alert from Security Hub that flows into Security Hub, CloudWatch Group, Kinesis, and then into Splunk, and then the security operations team starts acting on it. Some of these are still manual, some of these are semi-automated. And also from Splunk, always an incident is created towards ServiceNow. Another example is, for instance, AWS Config. If that detects some kind of misconfiguration, hey, there's an S3 bucket not properly set, then that flags into Security Hub, and an incident is created into ServiceNow. Maybe to illustrate that we don't distinguish between, from an incident perspective, between detective, like, hey, we see some funky stuff going on. We detect through GuardDuty that there's some system that's calling home outbound through DNS, might be some kind of malware. But also, what I just stated, any kind of misconfiguration that you have, we also immediately treat as an incident. And that brings us back to that holistic security posture management governance aspect. At the bottom, interesting to note, we're still also at the start there. So this whole thing is a journey. It takes time to grow. We're looking into Cloud Custodian to do full incident remediation, mostly focused on handling misconfigurations. So, what does this all boil down to from a process perspective? First of all, we have our cybersecurity department. They set the security governance and controls. We have the CCE, of which I'm part of. We take those security controls and we decide, okay, what kind of policies, what kind of rules do we need to set, SCPs, AWS config rules, all different kinds of things. And those are then implemented in AWS. The thing starts monitoring, as you see in the last slide. So if there's an incident, the incident is signed in ServiceNow, and the respective cloud consumer team needs to pick up that incident and resolve it. Looking back in the governance slide, support and education, there comes in the last one. So we have TCS as our security service provider, and we set up a separate entity outside the SOC that's really focused on improving cloud security. And they will contact the cloud consumer team and ask them, hey, do you need help? This is the misconfiguration. These are the standard runbooks that you can apply. So really educating and driving, improving that security posture for the cloud consumer. And at the end, like in any organization, we have managers that want to have reports. They want to see how we're doing and improving. So we have our overall reporting portal, which we built into Splunk. So with that, I end my NXP presentation. And I think the final thing to notice, all of this architecture setup took a while. So it's not like from day 0 to day 1, we have this all done. So I would also advise you to start small, build using the native tools, because that allows you to easily and quickly onboard and get you going. So with that, I hand the floor over to Loe, who will dig deeper into this.
Thanks for yours.
There you go.
Everyone, I think probably before I get started, I think the most important takeaway that I want to take from Joris's talk is there was a journey of 4 years that it took NXP to be able to get to that level of automation and that level of scale. The question is, from an AWS perspective, what is it that we can do for organizations that are still starting in this journey to make sure that that scale that gets to from starting in a security practice into incident response automation, that the journey is not that hard. So before we kind of dive into that, it's really important to understand how a security incident starts. On a high level, when we start talking about security controls, they typically fall into one or two categories: preventative control or detective control. In a preventative control, you're essentially discouraging errors or irregularities before they occur, and they are usually proactive in nature. A really good example is using something like the AWS network firewall to block SSH or RDP traffic across your VPC. Detective controls are a little bit different. You're designing it to be able to catch and deal with errors after they occur. These controls are typically reactive in nature. A really good example here is guard duty, where it can surface unusual behavior or unusual activity coming into your AWS environment. Let's say you're getting a user that's logging in from a location that you haven't seen before, even though they're using the right credentials and the right level of access. Or something like finding PII findings from a Macy scan. Additionally, it's important to build your detective controls to be able to catch errors or missed controls from a preventative perspective. A good example of that is leveraging Security Hub standards for you to be able to feed back into a preventative control. So when we talk to customers about this, I think it's very well covered. That's very, very well understood. But there's a lot to deal with. And there is a lot of automation, and there's a lot of work that customers need to be able to build to get to a level of automation and scale when you're building your security incident response posture in AWS. So again, the preventative controls that we talked about are usually derived from a perceived risk that an organization sees. That is something that comes in from a compliance, from a regulatory perspective, or just good common sense. Detective control flows are usually a little bit different. You're looking for things that you usually don't know what they are before they happened. And that's the example that I've given around unusual behavior that you're surfacing across your environment, or an example of somebody running a Tor client on their laptop and you're detecting unusual activity leading into an AWS environment. So this is where automation is the driving factor for you to be able to scale this across your environment. For you to scale and automate your responses, that could be a tall order for some customers. There's an expectation with customers that are starting their journey on AWS that they want to build that security posture from the start. There's an expectation that you have automated response to a lot of the different findings that you're getting. But the reality is some customers do not know what is required for you to be able to build and automate that from day one. And as we tell customers, it's a journey. As long as you're using the right tools for visibility and surfacing those findings, you can build that automation as you go along. And I think that's really the purpose of this talk, is how do we actually enable you and give you the right tools for you to start your automation journey, even though you don't have the right visibility across your AWS environment. So what do we actually also tell you as a customer when you start building an AWS around incident response, is that once you've surfaced those detective control findings, you need to create a runbook. And once you create a runbook, that essentially dictates how you're going to deal with that specific finding or the error that you're finding across your AWS environment into a structured step in terms of how you're going to deal with that from an organizational perspective. And then the next step is taking that incident response playbook and automating that. And automating that can take multiple factors depending on what type of security tools you're using, what type of automation response that you want to do, what level of governance you want to also employ across your developers. The problem is that there's a gap of time, resources, for you to be able to automate all the different findings that you enable across an AWS environment. If we take a simple example, if you enable some of our native AWS security services, let's take Amazon Inspector, Guard Duty, and you're feeding that into Security Hub. In a typical environment where you're running multiple workloads, most likely you're going to be finding 50 or 100 or 200 different types of findings that you need to be able to deal with. The question is, do you have the time and do you have the right resources for you to be able to automate the responses to all this day one? That's unlikely. And that leaves customers in a bad state, where they automate some of the controls and some of the preventative stuff that they want to measure, but some of the other stuff goes either unnoticed or undealt with. And that's not a good state. And it's really hard for you to be able to change that mentality once you've deployed that model across your organization. So the question that we asked internally is there a way where we can make this simpler for customers to start automating the responses? But before we get into that, this is typically what we see customers do. Very, very similar to the architecture that Joris went through from an NXP perspective. You're consolidating everything into Security Hub. You're using events, using something like Event Bridge, for example, to trigger a rule. And based on that rule, you're using like either a Lambda function or step functions or AWS Systems Manager for you to be able to either remediate, inform the service desk, open a ticket, or essentially track the life cycle of an incident across your environment. And that's quite a mature kind of structure that we expect customers to go through. We've built in a lot of capabilities within Security Hub and GuardDuty to give you some good sample remediation options that are available for you based on the finding type. And that is a really good way for you to start building your automation. But still, in a multi-account environment across multiple accounts and multiple development teams, these number of findings is getting higher and is getting bigger. And it's harder for a centralized SOC team to be able to automate that. And the reality is you also want to get your development teams involved in the remediation of these factors. Another thing, if I want to draw back into what Joris talked about from NXP perspective, is once a ticket has been issued from Security Hub or from Splunk, it's assigned automatically to the development teams. And the development teams work with the SOC teams in terms of automating and remediating these findings. So that's also another approach that we want to ensure that our development teams have to get that security awareness across how they build services within AWS, and also have that continuous improvement cycle from a development perspective. So again, we talked about manual processes to automated AR. We expect if you have existing processes to automate them, if you have processes that you ran from an on-premises perspective, to be able to transform that into cloud-specific or AWS-specific processes. But again, there's a big gap to do. So the question is there a better way? And the answer is yes. I've coined the new term semi-automated incident response. I don't know if that's going to fly or not, but that's kind of what I'm going with. So semi-automated incident response is the ability to have a structured approach to new findings or findings that you don't have an automated remediation for. And the reality behind that is that that gives you as an organization the tools and the capabilities to be able to have the right visibility, take a structured approach in terms of some of these findings that you haven't dealt with before, and give you the right visibility to start focusing your efforts on what type of incidents do I really want to automate. So this is where I believe AWS Systems Manager, Incident Manager, which is a really short, easy name to remember, is a great tool that can help you get across that divide. So if you're familiar with the AWS Systems Manager toolset, essentially it's a bunch of operational tools that helps organizations improve their security posture across an operational state. Whether we're talking about patch management, session manager, automation docs, it's part of that suite of services that's available for you to be able to manage your operational resources across AWS. But Incident Manager specifically, we released that last year. An Incident Manager gives you the ability to track an incident across the life cycle of the incident within AWS. So you can create things like automated incident response plans initiated by CloudWatch alarms or even Amazon Event Bridge rules. You can define those runbooks through Systems Manager automation to be able to automate as you go along some of the responses for these incidents that you're getting. You can also automatically connect the right people for each unique incident. So you can do actually assignment based on account, based on tags, based on multiple different metrics that you want to do within Incident Manager to be able to engage the right teams to start the incident response process. It has a bunch of integrations that are available out of the box. You can integrate it with AWS chatbots. You can also now integrate it with things like Slack for you to be able to notify the SOC teams with these incidents that are happening across your environment. It has a bunch of really cool tools around acknowledgement as well, so you can actually track when the incident has been acknowledged, what's the team working on, and what are the steps that they are following for them to be able to automate and respond to these types of incidents. Finally, it also kind of gives you a really cool dashboard around the post-analysis, where you can actually also understand what the team has done to be able to resolve that incident, what steps they took to get there. And you can actually create that in a dashboard way for you to be able to look back from a management perspective and understand the time and the effort that the teams have took to be able to respond to that. Another thing around Incident Manager, we've built it around the same structure that Amazon or AWS specifically deals with incidents. If you heard of something called COE, correction of error, it's the Amazon way in terms of how we deal with incidents internally. We've got the 7 whys, which is why did the incident happen? And once you get the response, you dig in deeper till you actually find the root cause. We've built in that methodology as part of Incident Manager, and Rebecca's going to show you that in the demo, to show you how we can get your development team to think at scale to really understand the root cause. The fact that an EC2 instance failed is not a root cause to the failure. The fact that the disk failed, well, why did the disk fail? What was running on the disk? What type of processes was running on the disk that led to that failure? And using that 7-why example gives the right teams the ability to dig in deeper to really understand what the root cause or the issue was. Right, so what does the incident lifecycle look like from an incident manager perspective? The first thing is alerting and engagement, so you can actually bring awareness of the incidents within your applications and within your teams, and we're going to show you what that looks like as well shortly in that demo. From there, you can do triage to determine the impact, whether this is impacting production type workloads, what specific applications are being impacted, and the ability to prioritize and activate an incident response plan. Once that's done, you can start investigating and mitigating some of these incidents, and you can use incident dashboards and runbooks that we're going to also take you through, and leveraging some of the timelines and the metrics that are coming in from CloudWatch or from third-party resources for you to be able to leverage that as part of your investigation. Finally, you're going to get that post-incident analysis that I talked about earlier, the ability to reflect on the incident and formulate ways in terms of how to deal with this in the future moving forward. And then it creates that feedback loop in terms of how you deal with incidents across a life cycle. Right, so I mentioned the integration. So Incident Manager can integrate with AWS chatbots and CloudFormation. Depends on what type of integration you want to do. From a chatbot perspective, you can use that as a way to track the life cycle in a group chat where, let's say, for example, using Slack or using Microsoft Teams, the ability to kind of push those updates across the incident to the right SOC teams to understand what's happening across these incidents in the case that you've decentralized the management of these incidents. CloudFormation as well, the ability to automate some of those responses and leveraging CloudFormation is a fantastic way for you to build that level of automation. You can also use abstraction tools like Terraform or CDK for you to be able to push that further from an automation perspective. You have direct integration with CloudWatch, so you can bring in a lot of the metrics that you do have from a CloudWatch perspective into the incident. So you kind of have a centralized way where you're seeing all the metrics and all the events that are happening across an incident into a centralized dashboard. And finally, you have the full suite of systems manager behind you for you to be able to automate the responses and build that incident response behind it. So going back to that semi-automated IR that I've kind of coined, this is a sample architecture that me and Rebecca built to show you what it looks like to take a finding that appeared in either GuardDuty or in Security Hub that you have 0 processes for today. Let's assume you're an organization today that has built your preventative controls, you've enabled GuardDuty, but you really have no automation behind that. So this is a really good architecture for you to be able to start automating some of those findings and actually dealing with them in a proactive way. So what does that look like? Essentially what we've done, I'm not going to go into the details because Rebecca's going to show you that live, but we created a custom action from Security Hub or from GuardDuty. And based on that custom action, the operator or the person responsible for managing the incidents from Security Hub can essentially click on a button that says trigger incident response. And once you trigger incident response, That's going to go into Event Bridge based on a rule that we've created. Is going to trigger Incident Manager and start your incident response plan. So that's kind of like the high-level architecture of what it's built. That's available for you today in any region that has Incident Manager in. And I think it's a fantastic way to get you to have a structured approach for how you're going to deal with these incidents or these findings that you haven't dealt with before. The other thing as well that it does give you the ability to is taking your incident response plans that you've built, regardless of how you've built them, whether they are in Word docs or in Jira or in GitHub or in a repo somewhere, and you can easily transform that into an incident response plan. The incident response plan doesn't actually have to be fully automated. These can be manual steps that you can build in as part of the Incident Manager response plan. So it really depends on the level of maturity that you've built around your incident response. You can take some of those steps. They could be generic. They could be very, very specific. And you can push them into an Incident Manager response plan to be able to build that. The heart of incident response is SSM automation. If you don't know what SSM automation is, essentially they're automation documents that are behind things like patch management and Systems Manager, Patch Manager, for example. It leverages SSM automation, the ability to run commands across multiple resources within your environment, Session Manager, and a bunch of different tools within the System Manager suite. They leverage the SSM automation. Incident Manager is no different. It's leveraging SSM automation documents that you can either use pre-existing ones or you can build your own. And you can leverage that as part of your starting steps of building your incident response plan. It gives you the ability to eliminate manual errors in your environment by repeatable runbooks that you trigger over and over and over again. It gives you also the ability to remediate non-compliant resources, leveraging things like AWS Config or Ops Manager or Ops Center, depending on what type of services that you've decided to use. And the great thing about that is that it can be a mix of manual and automated processes, depending on what you want to do there. You can create dynamic workflows, and you can do branching from there as well. So depending on the type of incident, you can trigger a sub-automation work document as well to give you the ability to do that in a more dynamic way. And if you're using Python or PowerShell, depending on the kind of environment that you're running in, you can trigger that as part of the automation document as well. You can also manually execute these SSM documents using the CLI and the SDKs, etc. Right, and with that, I'm going to hand over to Rebecca. I'm going to stop talking theory, and she's going to show you what it looks like in action.
Thank you very much. OK. So luckily for me, we have pre-recorded this. So before I press the play button, what you can see there is Systems Manager. The first step is to build out that SSM automation document. So as Luai said, we want to be adding in those manual steps that we've got documented somewhere in different places. So here's a sample SSM document. So in here, you build out the steps that you've got. So for this example, we've got 4 different steps. The first one is create your ticket. The second one is about containment, so turning off, if it's a credential compromise, then turn off the policies that that credential is associated with. Investigate the incident is step 3, so look at your logs, look at your security tooling, and then finally the recovery. So this is just an example that we've kind of set out for the demo. So into Incident Manager itself. So the first thing you're going to want to do is set up all of those contacts that you need and all of those integrations with maybe with Slack or with Chatbox. So you've got all of the right people responding to this incident. So you can add them all in there. The next thing is your escalation plan. So say your initial responders don't respond in the time that you want for each stage, then you can build an escalation plan to make sure that somebody else is around to pick up that incident if the first person hasn't done it. So that's, we're seeing the actual escalation plan there. Next step is to build the response plan itself. So we've got an example of a response plan to any Security Hub finding. You can do it per finding. You don't have to do it for any. You can do it individual ones. And then you add in all of the information for that particular response. So your contacts, the escalation points, and then you can see the actual Systems Manager document as well. So the actual runbook and the actual steps. For those of you that are running workloads in multiple regions, you can replicate this response plan across all of the regions in your account. So you don't need to set that up for each region. You can just add in the regions here, and it will replicate that for you across the different regions. OK, so now we talked about we need something to trigger this response plan. So we've built it, but now we need to trigger it. So we're in EventBridge here. And we're building the rule that will take a Security Hub finding and trigger the incident on the back of that finding automatically. So that's the actual event pattern rule there. So we'll need something called a Security Hub custom action, which I'll show you in a minute, which is the actual thing that triggers the response plan. So next, we will go. So now you're seeing Security Hub, and you can see some findings listed there. We're going to need to build out that custom action. So this is the thing that actually sends the finding to EventBridge and actually triggers the plan. So you've got your finding in Security Hub. You've got your custom action that will deliver the finding to EventBridge. And then EventBridge has the rule that says, please initiate this particular incident response plan on the back of this finding. So now we'll show an actual incident being kicked off. Just need to find a high priority finding. Brilliant. OK, so if we select this finding here, it can be any finding. We've done one for the demo here. So we're going to manually trigger the incident response plan. You can have that done so it's automated as well. Just for the demo, we'll show it manually. And then, so now we're into Incident Manager. If we refresh this here, it will load up our incident. So it's automatically generated an actual incident in your thing. So yeah, it's status open. You can see there it's not been acknowledged yet. So anyone you've listed as a contact in Incident Manager will now have an email. That email will contain a code that they will need to enter to acknowledge it. So we know that only the people named on that incident can acknowledge it. You can see us entering the code here. And again, if that's not responded to in under a minute, which we've set up for the demo, then your escalation contact will be reached out to. You can obviously configure the amount of time that you want to do that for. Here's all of the detail. So we've got Security Hub findings here. So this is all of the information that you see in Security Hub. If you've configured it for guard duty or any other source, then you'll see all of the information for that particular source. You've got a timeline there. And then here we have the actual steps of your runbook. So remember, we configured 4 steps in our runbook. When it's an incident in Incident Manager, you can step through each of these manually. So the first one was create ticket. So once you've gone ahead and created your ticket, you can step through the next stage by pressing the resume button at the bottom. So yeah, we'll see us stepping through. So this is the next phase. So now we're on to containment. So maybe we've turned off the specific roles that have got the compromised credentials. Once we've done that, we can press resume. On to the next stage. So now we're investigating our CloudTrail logs. We're looking at guard duty. We're trying to find out what happened and why. So meanwhile, in the background, whilst you're stepping through each of these, a timer is ticking. So you can have specific metrics that say, how long has it taken you to resolve each phase of your response plan, which is why it's really important in your Systems Manager document that you set out the individual steps so that you can track the metrics for each stage. So we talked about integration with CloudWatch. So here is where you can add those dashboards that you're using or any metrics that you're using either for detection or for analysis of the actual incident. This is just so you can have all of it in one place here. So when you're looking back, you can see, well, what did I look at? What information did I use? What did we have to hand at the time? Here's your timeline. So it's really detailed in terms of when each stage was started and what happened at each stage. And again, this is just showing you the stages and kind of so you can look back what you did here. You get some quick links back to the original Security Hub finding here and the EventBridge rules. So just so you're not kind of looking around the console, you can really easily get back to like the source of the actual incident. So yeah, we've now wrapped up our incident. We've resolved it. We've carried out some forensic analysis maybe, and we need to resolve. OK, so our incident's done. So now we need to do a retrospective, and we need to socialize what we did and improve how we did it. So what we're showing you here is the analysis feature of Incident Manager. It's essentially a space to add a summary of what the incident was, how it happened. You add in the impact here as well. So did you lose data? Was there downtime? How long were your customers affected for? That kind of information. There's also a bunch of questions about, okay, well, how could you half the time that you spent detecting the incident? So how could you detect this incident quicker? Or how could you facilitate the investigation of it quicker? So you'll see now, we'll start to dig into some of the fields you have on the analysis report. This is all built on a standard template provided by AWS, so you don't need to build this out yourself. You can build your own template, but we give you one just so it's kind of pre-prepared with questions before you get in. So so often after you've finished with the incident, the people that are not involved directly in fixing it might just have a load of questions about, well, what was it, what happened, and this is where they could come and actually have a look at what you've done and what you've written up about the report. Luai also mentioned the 7 whys, so we'll see in a moment that there's space there for properly digging into what was the root cause of your incident. So, for example, in the credential compromise, you might have gone, okay, well, we've got some compromised credentials, but why? Okay, well, one of our engineers accidentally put clear text passwords in a GitHub file. Okay, that's not why it happened. Okay, why did that happen? Well, they didn't have any tooling to detect that any credentials in their GitLab code. Okay, why was that? So we're seeing some of the questions here now. Why was that? Well, we don't have anybody in our team that actually looks at tooling. So now you have 2 actions there. You know you need to make someone or hire somebody to look at tooling to help detect incidents. And you know you might have an education piece around checking code or peer reviewing before you publish it. So it takes you away from focusing on kind of the immediate incident, but the bigger picture around that incident. So you're seeing here some of the questions, and you can see it goes into quite a lot of detail. Luai talked about the incident lifecycle. So the questions here follow that lifecycle. Here we are. Here's the 5 whys. Yeah, you're seeing lots of information here. And again, the bit here is about the lessons learned. So once you've worked out what was it that went wrong, and bigger picture in terms of processes and people and training and the tooling, you can then come back and say, well, what lessons have we learned and how can we make this better in the future? One thing you can do here is create an action list as well. So we'll see in a moment that for each of the stages, you can say, okay, we want to add a new CloudWatch dashboard that is going to help us detect this incident quicker. It's going to have a new metric that we're going to maybe change the threshold on that will identify that incident earlier than we did before. Here's the action list. So this is a custom action that we're creating here. You can add in anything you like and start to build out that set of steps to remediate this next time. So we'll just wait for that to add in. Perfect. OK, so now you literally have your summary of the incident and everything that happened there. So what we can start to do next is build out that feedback loop. So we've put a lot of data into management here, and we can use these metrics to drive that continuous improvement. So what you'll have now, so every time a Security Hub finding kicks off, you'll be able to count that. And you'll be able to see, well, we've actually had this particular incident 10 times now. And you can use that metric to say, wouldn't it be great if we save some time by automating the response to this incident? Because at the moment, we're manually remediating this. So you have actual evidence to build out and kind of prioritize the time and money to implement that automated response. The other thing you can do is start to go back and edit your Systems Manager documents or SSM automation documents with the automation steps. So you can have a mix of your manual steps and your automated steps in one place. So that's how you can sort of start to slowly build out individual remediations without having to kind of get lost in, oh my gosh, we've got to automate everything. You can just start to implement the ones that are most commonly occurring based on the metrics that you have in Incident Manager.